You've heard these stories every Christmas, but tonight I'm sharing the things you didn't know, the secrets, surprises, and quiet little wonders hidden behind every Rankin Bass holiday special. Santa Claus is coming to town. The special reused physical puppets from earlier Rankin Bass productions. Many background figures were recycled from Rudolph and Little Drummer Boy and repainted to blend in with Sombertown's citizens. Kris Kringle's puppet was one of the tallest animagic figures ever made. Most Rankin Bass puppets were under 8 inches tall, but Kris needed a larger frame to allow broader gestures and more expressive motion. Jessica's transformation design required an entirely new face mold. Unlike most female puppets who had interchangeable expressions painted on, Jessica's puppet needed additional replacement mouthpieces to allow her singing performance. Burgermeister Meisterburger's puppet weighed significantly more than the others. His rotund shape and layered costume required an internal metal armature that animators often described as exhausting to pose. Some Sombertown backgrounds were painted on glass instead of paper. This allowed animators to slide layers behind one another for a storybook depth effect without building miniature sets. The Winter Warlock's magic snow sequence used a rare trick with powdered resin. The team sprinkled fine resin across multiple frames to create sparkle glints that looked brighter than normal paper snow. Paul Coker Jr.'s concept art changed the tone of the entire special. Originally, Sombertown was meant to look darker and more medieval, but Coker's softer, rounded designs shifted the style toward a friendlier, fairy tale world. The stop-motion crew animated a younger Winter Warlock scene that was never aired. The sequence was scrapped early, but traces of it survive in production notes and unused sketches. The animagic puppets were nearly lost in shipping. During transport from Japan to the US, one crate went missing for 3 days, causing panic at Rankin Bass. It contained the Winter Warlock, Kris, and most of the Kringle family. The original broadcast included a Kellogg's sponsor tag with custom Rankin Bass animation. These sponsor bumpers never re-aired in later broadcasts, and most viewers today have never seen them unless they own certain rare VHS releases. A Christmas Tree. It is one of the only Rankin Bass Christmas specials animated entirely in Japan with minimal US post-production. Unlike their bigger titles, this one relied almost completely on the Japanese team, which gives it a noticeably different rhythm and tone. The special was produced on a shorter timeline than most Rankin Bass projects. Animators have mentioned that it was created as a filler holiday program during a gap in their production schedule. Roddy's character design was reused from early concept art for another abandoned Rankin Bass project. The unused project was meant to be a non-holiday story featuring a boy and a talking dog. The tree itself was animated using a mix of cell overlays and static illustrated plates. This hybrid technique was unusual for Rankin Bass and used only in a few of their productions. Several background paintings from this special appear again in the first Christmas snow. The snowy fields and churchyard scenes were subtly recolored and repurposed. The film's narration was recorded before the script was fully finalized. As a result, some scenes were animated around narration that didn't perfectly match the visuals, giving it a slightly dreamy tone. The music cues were composed using leftover melodic fragments from unused Rankin Bass jingles. These fragments were rearranged into softer, slower motifs to match the gentle tone of the story. The special had extremely limited syndication. After its initial early 70s broadcasts, it appeared only sporadically, which is why many fans have never heard of it. Only one original film print is known to survive in private hands. Collectors note that all circulating versions come from the same low-quality transfer of that print. It is one of the few Rankin Bass specials without any supernatural or fantastical characters. No talking toys, magical creatures, or mythical figures, making it one of the most grounded and realistic entries in the entire Rankin Bass holiday catalogue, The Stingiest Man in Town. It is a remake of a live-action 1956 NBC musical starring Basil Rathbone. Rankin Bass adapted the earlier stage-style television production almost song for song, making this one of their few direct musical remakes. Walter Matthau didn't record his lines with the rest of the cast. He completed all his dialogue sessions independently due to scheduling conflicts, and his audio had to be mixed carefully to match the ensemble tone. The cricket narrator is an homage to Jiminy Cricket, not a Dickens character. Rankin Bass added him as a whimsical narrative device because they felt the story needed a gentle anchor for younger viewers. This is one of the last Rankin Bass specials to rely heavily on traditional hand-drawn animation instead of stop-motion. It was animated by the same Japanese studios that later worked on early anime hits, giving it a slightly different feel from earlier cel-animated Rankin Bass works. Several musical numbers were shortened from the original 1956 production. The cuts were made late in editing to fit the broadcast time slot, and some of the removed verses survive only in sheet music. The character designs were based on Paul Coker Jr.'s looser sketches, not his finalized art style. Animators used these rougher drafts deliberately to give the special a softer storybook quality. The Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come was animated using unusually thin outlines. This gave the figure an eerie, drifting look without relying on heavy shadows or dramatic lighting. The snow effects in several scenes were created using powdered chalk filmed over double-exposed backgrounds, a practical technique that Rankin Bass rarely used outside this production. This special was not re-aired as frequently as other Christmas Carol adaptations. Its limited syndication helped create the impression that it disappeared, despite being a major Rankin Bass holiday musical. It contains more songs than any other Rankin Bass Christmas special. This includes reprises and partial reprises, making it the most musically dense entry in the entire catalogue. Nestor, the long-eared Christmas donkey. The story was inspired by a real children's book, but Rankin Bass made major changes. The original tale was shorter and less dramatic. The studio added Nestor's mother, the desert journey, and the stronger emotional arc. Will Einarb created Nestor's puppet with detachable, posable ears. Each ear had multiple internal wires, making them the most complex facial appendages ever built for a Rankin Bass animagic character. The animators intentionally slowed the frame rate during emotional scenes. This gave Nestor's expressions a heavy, weighty feeling that matched the somber tone of the story. The desert backgrounds were painted using a rare dry brush over vellum technique. This allowed the dunes to look soft and luminous without harsh outlines. A very unusual look for Rankin Bass. Roger Miller recorded his narration in a single session. He improvised small phrasing tweaks and musical inflections that the studio kept exactly as delivered. Nestor's design was partially modelled after early sketches of Rudolph. The animators wanted him to have a similar innocence without repeating the reindeer's iconic look. The angel's puppet did not have moving eyelids. Instead, animators used head tilts and lighting to suggest blinking, a subtle trick rarely used in their earlier specials. Several scenes were storyboarded to be more intense. Early drafts included harsher weather and longer desert sequences, but were softened to avoid frightening younger viewers. The special's music was originally meant for a completely different Rankin Bass project. 2 unused compositions were adapted into Nestor's score after another production hit delays. It aired only once during its original broadcast year on ABC. The limited exposure contributed to Nestor becoming one of the least known Rankin Bass Christmas specials, despite its strong emotional impact. Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. It was the most expensive Rankin Bass animagic production ever made. The feature-length format, complex lighting, and large number of puppets pushed the budget far beyond their earlier specials. The film brought back several original Rudolph puppets that had deteriorated over time. The animators restored them frame by frame, repairing cracking foam and repainting details before shooting began. Winterbolt is one of the few Rankin Bass villains with a fully developed backstory. His fall from power, his connection to Lady Boreal, and his influence over the North Pole were all planned to set up a larger mythos, though the studio never produced the follow-ups. Rudolph's glowing nose was lit using a tiny bulb wired through the puppet's head. The technique was more advanced than in 1964, allowing a brighter, steadier glow that didn't flicker between frames. The circus sequences required the largest set ever built for a Rankin Bass stop-motion production. Multiple layers of tents, ramps, mini-stages, and audience rows filled an entire studio room in Japan. Frosty's family puppets were created with removable, melted versions. These were used for transitional shots, but were ultimately minimized because they proved too delicate to animate smoothly. Mickey Rooney voiced both Santa and the circus owner, Milton. The dual performance was done in consecutive sessions, and Rooney improvised several lines to keep Milton's character lively. The production reused unreleased music written for an abandoned Rankin Bass film. Several instrumental cues originally composed for a shelved fantasy project were rearranged to fit the circus set pieces. This is the only Rankin Bass special that crosses over characters from multiple animagic universes. Rudolph, Frosty, Santa, Mrs. Claus, and several new magical beings appear together, something the studio never fully repeated. The film failed to secure annual re-airings because stations weren't sure whether to treat it as a Christmas special or a summer movie. Its unusual seasonal setting led to inconsistent broadcasts, contributing to its status as a lost Rankin Bass gem for many viewers. Jack Frost. Jack Frost's puppet used more facial replacement pieces than any previous Rankin Bass character. Animators had over a dozen removable mouth and eye plates to create his expressive, mischievous personality. Kubla Kraus's mechanical horse, Klangstomp, was operated with magnets beneath the set. This allowed the puppet to clank forward without visible wires, a technique Rankin Bass only used in 2 productions. The film's concept art originally depicted Jack as much older. Early sketches showed him as a wise, bearded winter spirit. The younger design was chosen to give the story a more romantic tone. The Groundhog Day sequence was animated separately months after principal shooting ended. Production notes suggest the studio added it to pad the runtime and give Pardon Me Pete a stronger presence. The village of January Junction was heavily inspired by Eastern European folk art. Background painters studied Polish and Czech holiday illustrations to create the color palette and architectural style. Elisa's puppet was one of the lightest ever made for a Rankin Bass special. Her thin arms and delicate dress required constant reinforcement during animation because they bent easily under studio lights. The Winter Wizard's magic effects were created using torn cellophane and backlit glitter. These practical effects produced the shimmering icy glow around Jack without needing optical post-production. The film contains reused animation cycles from Rudolph's Shiny New Year. Walk cycles, snow bursts and certain background pans were subtly incorporated to save production time. This was the last big-budget Rankin Bass stop-motion film before the studio shifted focus to cheaper, faster productions. Its ambitious sets and puppet count were difficult to justify financially in later years. The special did not originally air in December. Its first broadcast was in February 1979, leaving some viewers confused about its holiday classification. It didn't become a Christmas staple until later syndication, Rudolph's Shiny New Year. Happy the Baby New Year had 3 different head sculpts. Each one showed a different emotional level, because animators found it too difficult to manipulate a single puppet for all of his wide facial expressions. Eon the Terrible's puppet was one of the heaviest ever built for Animagic. His dragon-like frame required a reinforced metal armature, making him extremely difficult to reposition between frames. Several Island of the Misfit Toys puppets were planned to appear in cameo shots. They were placed on early storyboards, but ultimately cut because their inclusion distracted from the New Year's storyline. The archipelago of last year's was painted using a technique called shadow haze wash. Artists layered diluted inks to create a misty, surreal look unique to this special. Several Island of the Misfit Toys puppets were planned to appear in cameo shots. They were placed on early storyboards, but ultimately cut because their inclusion distracted from the New Year's storyline. The archipelago of last year's was painted using a technique called shadow haze wash. Artists layered diluted inks to create a misty, surreal look unique to this special. The character of Father Time was originally written for Bing Crosby. After scheduling issues arose, Red Skelton stepped in, adding improvisational warmth to the final performance. Rudolph's puppet received an upgrade from the 1964 original. His nose-lighting mechanism was replaced with a safer, cooler bulb, and his leg joints were reinforced to allow more fluid running animation. The film introduces more original characters than any other Rankin Bass holiday special. This includes Big Ben, Aeon, the 7 Baby New Years, and multiple personified calendar figures. Early concept art for the 7 Baby New Years portrayed them as symbolic shapes instead of children. The designs resembled abstract calendar icons before they were changed to more human-like forms. The special was originally marketed as a New Year's Eve broadcast, not a Christmas special. ABC promoted it heavily for December 31st programming blocks, which is why its holiday identity has always been a bit unusual. Rankin Bass reused several puppet armatures from past productions to save time. Under their costumes, characters like Father Time and General Ticker share internal structures with puppets from Here Comes, Peter Cottontail, and Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The story of the first Christmas snow. Angela Lansbury recorded her narration in London, not the US or Japan. Her schedule only allowed a single session abroad, so Rankin Job Bass shipped custom audio equipment overseas to capture her performance. Lucas's puppet was built with a softer foam mixture than most Animagic figures. This allowed subtler expressions, but made the puppet fragile. Animators frequently repaired his face between shots. The snowfall effect during the pageant was created with finely shredded wax paper blown through miniature fans. This gave the snow a soft drifting quality different from the glitter-based snow used in other specials. The church interior set was the largest indoor animagic environment Rankin Bass created in the 1970s. It featured multi-layered pews, candles with flickering bulbs, and removable ceiling panels for overhead shots. The nuns' costumes were actual fabric miniatures, not molded clay or foam. This allowed gentle flowing motion during animation, but required constant reshaping to prevent wrinkles from appearing on camera. The original script included a scene where Lucas explains how he became a shepherd. The scene was storyboarded but cut for time, leaving his backstory intentionally vague. The music was built around an unused melody from an abandoned Rankin Bass Easter special. The melody was slowed, softened, and transformed into the film's peaceful choral theme. Most of the background paintings used pastel shading rather than ink outlines. This gives the special a noticeably softer, dreamier look than other Rankin Bass productions from the same era. The music was built around an unused melody from an abandoned Rankin Bass Easter special. The melody was slowed, softened, and transformed into the film's peaceful choral theme. Most of the background paintings used pastel shading rather than ink outlines. This gives the special a noticeably softer, dreamier look than other Rankin Bass productions from the same era. Sister Teresa's puppet required special armature adjustments for her hand gestures. The animators wanted her movements to be gentle and nurturing, so they customized her wrist joints for smoother articulation. The special briefly disappeared from television in the late 1980s due to music rights issues. Pinocchio's puppet was originally designed for a different Rankin Bass project. He was first built for a planned Pinocchio television series that never moved forward. The Christmas special reworked his facial plates and costume to match the holiday theme. The fox and cat puppets reused armatures from villains in earlier specials. Their internal skeletons came from repurposed models used in Rudolph's Shiny New Year and The Year Without a Santa Claus, then rebuilt with new foam bodies. The animated fireplace scenes used a rare triple-layer lighting setup. Animators combined flickering bulbs, colored gels, and backlit acetate flames to create a warmer glow than typical animagic fire effects. The Christmas market set was one of the most detailed miniature street scenes Rankin Bass ever built. It had more than 40 small shops, each with painted interiors, even though many are never seen on screen. The puppet for Geppetto had removable hands with different poses. This allowed delicate woodworking gestures during animation, a technique only used a few times in the studio's history. An early script draft included the Blue Fairy in several scenes. Budget constraints led the studio to reduce her role significantly, leaving only brief magical moments. The puppet for Geppetto had removable hands with different poses. This allowed delicate woodworking gestures during animation, a technique only used a few times in the studio's history. An early script draft included the Blue Fairy in several scenes. Budget constraints led the studio to reduce her role significantly, leaving only brief magical moments. The special features one of the longest continuous animagic shots Rankin Bass attempted. A market pan sequence running nearly 30 seconds was animated without cuts, an extremely rare challenge for stop motion. The soundtrack reuses melodies originally composed for the Enchanted World of Danny Kaye specials. Unused cues from The Emperor's New Clothes were adapted into softer holiday arrangements. Several background characters were built from leftover parts. Animators combined old puppet components with new costumes to quickly populate the crowded market scenes. The special had limited US syndication because Rankin Bass was shifting toward licensed properties. The Leprechaun's Christmas Gold. The special was originally developed as a St. Patrick's Day project. Rankin Bass repurposed an early script meant for a March broadcast and added Christmas elements only late in production. Old Mag the Hag's puppet used glow paint under blacklight. Her eyes and mouth were designed to subtly glow during animation, giving her an eerie presence without visual effects. Dinty Doyle's sailor puppet was one of the smallest human puppets ever built for Animagic. His proportions were intentionally compact, so animators could frame the leprechauns as the dominant characters. Many of the leprechaun puppets reused armature parts from Here Comes Peter Cottontail. Rankin Drew Bass frequently recycled puppet skeletons, and several of the leprechauns' bodies come directly from leftover rabbit forms. The special contains more dialogue-driven scenes than musical numbers. This is unusual for a Rankin Charge-based holiday program, which typically relied on songs to structure the story. Background artists created unique moss textures using dyed sponge pieces. These sponges were sliced thinly and glued to boards to create rugged island cliffs and bogs. Art Carney recorded all his lines for Blani Kilakilani in a single afternoon. He ad-libbed several comedic flourishes that were kept in the final cut. The special includes one of the rare instances of water animation in a Rankin stop-motion set. The shoreline scenes used layered cellophane sheets and rotating gel lights to simulate waves. A full musical finale was storyboarded but never produced. Budget limitations forced the studio to cut the number, leaving the ending quieter than originally planned. Its unusual mix of folklore and Christmas themes confused networks, because broadcasters weren't sure whether it fit better in December or March schedules. The special received very few reruns and faded into obscurity. Cricket on the Hearth. It was Rankin Bass's first fully cel-animated Christmas special. Before this, the studio was primarily known for stop-motion Animagic. This project tested whether they could produce holiday specials more quickly using 2D animation. The cricket, named Crockett, was not in Dickens' original story. Rankin Bass added him as a whimsical narrator to make the tale more appealing to children. A recurring technique the studio later used with other stories. Danny Thomas recorded multiple versions of his narration. Some takes were humorous, others somber. The producers combined the gentler takes to match the sentimental tone they wanted. The special was animated by the same Japanese team that later worked on early anime series. This includes artists connected to studios that would later evolve into Topcraft and eventually Studio Ghibli. Many scenes reuse background paintings to save production costs. The Plummer home interiors appear from different angles with only slight recoloring or added props. The vision loss effect for Bertha was created using layered acetate sheets. Animators hand-painted cloudy overlays that were slid across the camera to simulate her impaired vision. The character designs were strongly influenced by 1950s greeting card illustrations. Rankin Bass hoped the style would make the special feel cozy and nostalgic, even though it was produced in the late 60s. A full musical number performed by Marlo Thomas was removed late in production. Only the instrumental version of the song survives in the final soundtrack, This is one of the few Rankin Bass Christmas specials without a supernatural or magical character. The cricket narrates the story, but never displays magical abilities, a rarity for the studio. ABC originally intended it to be an annual broadcast, but ratings were lower than expected. Because it didn't match the success of Rudolph, it fell out of rotation quickly, contributing to its lost special reputation, The Little Drummer Boy. Aaron's puppet was one of the few Rankin Bass characters sculpted with asymmetrical facial features. The designers purposely gave him slightly uneven expressions to emphasize his emotional turmoil and hard life before meeting the Magi. The animators used real sand on the miniature sets. Because sand shifts unpredictably, they mixed it with resin granules to keep it from ruining continuity between shots. The camel puppets were built with articulated cheek pouches. These allowed subtle chewing motions, a level of detail rarely attempted in animagic productions. The soundtrack was recorded before any animation was completed. This forced the animators to match mouth movements and pacing entirely to pre-existing audio, a demanding process, especially with emotional scenes. The song "One Star in the Night" was originally written for a never-produced Rankin Bass Easter special. The melody was repurposed, slowed down, and transformed into one of the special's most moving numbers. The Magi's costumes were inspired by Byzantine art, not traditional biblical depictions. This gives them a distinct visual style compared to other Christmas adaptations of the era. The special used a record number of nighttime setups for its time. More than half the scenes required low light or candlelit effects, which were especially difficult in stop-motion photography. Aaron's drum was animated with a rotating internal rod system. Instead of swapping frames or puppets, animators used a tiny interior mechanism to keep the drumsticks aligned precisely with the beat. Several early storyboards included harsher scenes depicting Aaron's past. The studio softened these moments to avoid making the special too intense for children, but traces of the original tone remain in his backstory. It aired as part of the Hallmark Hall of Fame-style Christmas programming block. NBC positioned it as a more prestigious holiday special, which is why the tone is more solemn and serious compared to other Rankin Bass productions. The Little Drummer Boy, Book 2. The sequel was created to satisfy a network request, not a Rankin Bass idea. NBC wanted another biblical-themed holiday special after the success of the original, prompting Rankin Bass to build a story around material only briefly hinted at in the first film. Aaron's puppet was rebuilt almost entirely from scratch. The original puppet had deteriorated beyond repair, so the sequel's version is noticeably smoother and slightly more stylized. Melchior's puppet was one of the oldest armatures ever reused by the studio. Its internal joints dated back to a mid-1960s cancelled pilot and were repurposed to save costs during production. The silver bells in the story were animated using miniature metal rings. Animators polished them daily under bright lights to avoid dulling, since even tiny scratches showed up on camera. The bandits' character designs were influenced by Japanese folk theatre. Because the special was animated in Japan, local artists incorporated subtle nods to kabuki-style makeup in their exaggerated faces. The donkey's movements were animated with a rare, joint-limited technique. Instead of fully articulated limbs, the donkey's legs used restricted-range internal wires, giving it a rigid but stylized gait. The soundtrack was completed after the visuals, unusual for Rankin Bass. Most of their productions animated to pre-recorded music, but this time The score was written to match completed scenes. The angel puppet originally had wings that moved. Early tests showed the movement was too distracting, so the wings were fixed in place, and subtle lighting effects suggested motion instead. Some of the desert background paintings were reused from Here Comes Peter Cottontail. Artists repurposed and recolored large scenic boards to meet the sequel's tight production schedule. The film aired far less frequently due to its stronger religious emphasis. Networks preferred lighter Christmas specials for annual rotation, so this sequel never received the same exposure as its predecessor. The Year Without a Santa Claus. The Miser Brothers were last-minute additions to the script. The early drafts didn't include Snow Miser or Heat Miser at all. They were introduced late in development to add energy to the story, and they ended up becoming the most iconic characters in the entire special. Snow Miser's puppet was partly based on concept art, originally meant for a scrapped Jack Frost villain. Designers reused the long, angular silhouette and exaggerated limbs to give him a theatrical, expressive style. Heat Miser's hair required constant repairs. The foam rubber flames on his head deteriorated quickly under studio lighting, forcing animators to repaint and patch him between scenes. Many of the Southtown backgrounds were modelled after real locations in Savannah, Georgia. Rankin Bass background artists studied Southern architecture and windowless town squares to create the warm versus cold contrast central to the story. Mrs. Claus's puppet was completely new and not based on her earlier designs. Because she takes a central role here, she received more facial plates and wider articulation than the minimal design used for her in Rudolph. Jingle and Jangle's sleigh was fabricated using balsa wood coated in resin. This made it lighter than the typical animagic props and easier to suspend for flying shots. The weather controller machine was built from leftover parts from other productions. Artists repurposed components from Here Comes Peter Cottontail and Santa Claus is Coming to Town to fill out the elaborate machinery. There was originally a third miser brother. Concept art exists for a rain miser who controlled storms and downpours. The character was dropped before voice casting began. The story was based on a book that had a far more serious tone. Phyllis McGinley's 1956 children's book was shorter and more somber, so Rankin Bass rewrote major portions to add humour and musical elements. The special's music was recorded with an unusually large orchestra for a TV holiday program. Producers wanted a richer sound to match the emotional scale, leading to some of the most memorable arrangements in the Rankin Bass catalogue. 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. The Trundle family and Father Mouse were entirely invented by Rankin Bass. The original poem doesn't feature them at all. The studio added a full cast of characters to create a narrative that could support a 25-minute special. The mouse designs were originally much more realistic. Early concept art shows them with longer snouts and natural proportions. But the studio switched to rounder, more childlike shapes to match Paul Coker Jr.'s signature style. Joshua Trundle's clock tower was one of the tallest miniature indoor sets Rankin Bass ever built. The set included multiple working gears and trapdoors to allow puppeteers to reposition the clock components frame by frame. The Letter to Santa sequence was animated before the final voice recordings were done. The animators used scratch audio and adjusted the lip sync later, causing slight mismatches that eagle-eyed viewers sometimes notice. The musical number, Even a Miracle Needs a Hand, was almost cut. ABC executives felt it slowed the pacing, but Arthur Rankin Jr. fought to keep it, and it later became one of the most beloved songs in the special. The snow animation was achieved with tiny bundles of shredded cellophane. These were suspended on thin wires above the set and shaken gently to simulate falling snow. An unusual trick for animagic. The interior backgrounds were painted with unusually warm tones for a winter special. Rankin Bass wanted Junctionville to feel cozy and inviting rather than cold and snowy, setting it apart from the icy landscapes of their other holiday productions. Thomas Chappell, the voice of Albert Mouse, recorded his lines remotely. He was in school at the time, so his performance was captured in a separate studio and mixed later, rare for Rankin Bass child roles. Santa Baby. It was the final production credited to Rankin Bass in any form. Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass were not creatively involved, but the company name was licensed for the project, making it the last TV special associated with their brand. The character designs were based on a 1990s Christmas card series. Producers secured the rights to a stylized, fashion-inspired card line and used those illustrations as the foundation for the film's look. Singer Patti LaBelle was originally approached to play Dakota's mother. She expressed interest, but scheduling conflicts prevented her involvement. The special reused a few background assets from earlier 2D Rankin Bass productions. Sharp-eyed viewers can spot modified versions of cityscapes from The First Christmas Snow and The Stingiest Man in Town. Dakota's design required more animation cells per scene than any other character. Her large eyes and expressive facial features resulted in unusually high cell turnover for a TV special of its time. The soundtrack was recorded before the final script was locked. This forced animators to adjust scenes to existing vocal rhythms, giving some sequences a slightly music video quality. The special originally contained a subplot about Dakota's school. Storyboarded scenes showed her performing a holiday recital, but the entire sequence was cut late in editing. The broadcast master was produced in widescreen, but ABC aired it cropped. This caused several visual gags and background details to be lost in the initial airing. Only a small number of animation staff had experience with Rankin Bass properties. Most of the crew came from newer digital studios, which helps explain the stylistic departure from earlier hand-drawn or animagic works. The special was intended as a pilot for a potential Dakota holiday miniseries. If ratings were strong, ABC planned a set of seasonal specials featuring Dakota helping Santa each year. But the series was never picked up. Frosty the Snowman. The animation style was modeled after Golden Age American greeting cards. Paul Coker Jr. adapted his holiday card artwork into character designs, giving Frosty's world a soft, watercolor feel distinct from typical 1960s TV animation. Frosty's puppet counterpart did exist, but only for reference. Even though the special is traditionally animated, Rankin Bass created a small stop-motion maquette to guide shading and three-dimensional poses. It never appears on screen. Karen's hair color changed during production. Early model sheets show her as a brunette. ABC requested a brighter design to make her stand out against snowy backgrounds, leading to her blonde look. Professor Hinkle's design was partially based on a vaudeville magician known as the Great Lester. Animators borrowed the heavy eyebrows, elongated limbs, and exaggerated cape flourishes from old stage photographs. The voice of Frosty Jackie Vernon originally recorded more humorous ad-libs. These improvised lines were removed to keep Frosty's personality gentle and childlike. The snowstorm sequence was animated using powdered soap flakes filmed over multiple exposures. This created a swirling, glowing storm effect that couldn't be achieved with standard cell animation alone. Santa's design in this special is unique and doesn't match other Rankin Bass Santas. His rounder face and simplified suit were meant to echo mid-century Christmas card art, rather than the studio's animagic holiday universe. The train station background took longer to paint than any other location in the special. Its depth, perspective lines, and holiday decorations required multiple artists and a layering technique similar to theatrical backdrop painting. The special originally ended with a different final shot. A storyboarded sequence had Frosty waving goodbye from atop Santa's sleigh, but ABC preferred the simpler fade-out after the narration. The song Frosty the Snowman was recorded with a children's chorus in New York, but mixed in Tokyo. This unusual cross-continental workflow happened because Rankin Bass's animation studio was based in Japan, and they wanted the musical tempo to match the exact animation timing. The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus. It was the final animagic stop-motion Christmas special ever produced by Rankin Bass. After this production, the studio shifted almost entirely to traditional animation and co-productions with other companies. The Claus puppet required more facial molds than any previous Rankin Bass Santa. Because the story follows him from youth to adulthood, animators built multiple interchangeable faceplates representing different ages and emotional states. The great axe design was partially inspired by Japanese no-theater masks. The animators used elongated facial proportions and simplified expressions to give Ak a mystical, timeless presence. The Forest of Burzee backgrounds were painted using a rare, misted gouache technique. Artists sprayed diluted paint across vellum to create the foggy, dreamlike look that sets this special apart visually. Several puppets from The Hobbit and The Last Unicorn were repurposed for background Burzee creatures. With minor modifications and new paint jobs, many mythic beings were recycled to populate the magical forest. Claus's childhood puppet had a unique internal joint system. His limbs were engineered to move more fluidly than standard animagic figures, giving him a playful, childlike energy in his early scenes. Composer Bernard Hoffer reused thematic ideas he originally wrote for Thundercats. Unused melodic fragments were softened and transformed into the mystical choral elements heard throughout Claus's journey. The final Council of Immortals sequence required an unusually large multi-level set. To stage the grand ceremony, animators built tiered platforms for the Immortals, one of the most complex indoor stop-motion sets Rankin Bass ever created. A darker version of the narrative was considered early in development. Early storyboards included more scenes showing the Agua's cruelty and Claus's struggle, but producers scaled it back to maintain a more hopeful tone. This special aired only once in prime time on CBS before moving to limited syndication. Because its tone was more mythic and solemn than traditional Christmas fare, it never became part of the annual broadcast rotation, contributing to its cult favorite status today. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Rudolph's nose originally did not light up. The very first puppet tests used a painted red bulb, but it didn't pop on camera. Animators later wired a tiny blinking light inside the puppet's head, something never attempted in stop motion for TV before that moment. Hermie's hair was made from dull-grade nylon fibers. Most Rankin bass characters used painted clay or sculpted foam hair, but Hermes' Golden Swoop was crafted from the same material used in 1960s fashion dolls. The Island of Misfit Toys scene was not originally included. NBC added pressure to expand the special, so Rankin Bass added the island, new characters, and additional songs late in production. Yukon Cornelius has a deleted storyline where he finds peppermint. Several scenes were filmed showing Yukon discovering peppermint mines, which is why he licks his pickaxe throughout the special. These scenes were cut from the broadcast and only restored decades later. The original Santa puppet was only 8 inches tall and notoriously difficult to pose. His beard kept snagging on his coat and armature joints, forcing animators to pause filming constantly to reshape it. The stop-motion sets were much smaller than they appear. The snowy mountain scenes were built on platforms only a few feet wide, using forced perspective to make them seem massive. Burl Ives was added after the film was nearly complete. The producers decided the special needed a recognizable narrator, so Sam the Snowman and his scenes were created late, replacing another narrator character. Clarice's puppet required more eye plates than any other character in the special. Her expressive eyelash and eye shape animations needed over a dozen interchangeable pieces, unusually high for female puppets at the time. The production used ground-up shower soap to simulate blowing snow. Animators sprinkled soap shavings over the set to capture light better than cotton or glitter, creating the sparkling effect during wind scenes. The original puppets were shipped back to the US and then disappeared for decades. They were later rediscovered in the early 2000s in a family's attic. Several had deteriorated, but Rudolph and Santa were restored and now reside in museums and private collections. We did it! A sleigh full of 200 hidden wonders from every corner of the Rankin Bass holiday world. These stories have brightened many winters, and their little secrets only make them shine a bit warmer.